Hello there. So we're literally just hours away from England's last 16 game against Mexico at this year's World Cup. And almost fittingly, it was yesterday I happened to stumble across this. It was a thing on the BBC iPlayer. It was England 2000, England the Golden 2006, the Golden Generation, I think it was called. So this will be my review documentary, basically mostly covering the 2006 World Cup. You know, kind of fitting 20 years ago. So, you know. This was real interesting because this was the whole height of the whole hype and everything like that about the surrounding that current group of England players and that like I think it was the FA themselves that almost made a rod for their back years earlier when they called them the Golden Generation, which in reality they became the quarter-final generation. I know anyone who's English who's now clicked into this and said, well, what about you? What about Scotland? Yeah, exactly. Trust me, I've slagged Scotland off plenty on this platform. So, I've got the receipts to back it up. So, we're not, the only generation we've got is the group stage generation. So, you know, this isn't meant as done as a whole shitting on England type thing. This is meant to be a sort of, you know, talking about the I'm just going factual here. So I honestly think that group of players were genuinely fucking overrated. And I'm going to say it there. I mean, yeah, they had great successes with their clubs and things like that. But no, I do think that group of players were overrated. And I think the media was genuinely quite insufferable at that time as well. And you can sort of see this throughout the whole broadcast here. Like, uh, the whole thing was like they were pumped up to hyped up. And if anything is weird, they seemed to be more hyped up back then when all they did was ever get to quarterfinals than they were during the Gareth Southgate times when they actually got to finals and semi-finals and things like that. So, granted they didn't win anything, but they were a hell of a lot better. And again, and I do always think there was something obviously about this squad that honestly came across as quite unlikable. Like they thought their shit didn't stink and all that. And it's weird because when you put a bunch of people like that together, it's almost like you can't really get a cohesive team. And it's interesting as well. Like Rio Ferdinand talks about something like this here, and I don't like. I've never liked Rio Ferdinand. I think he's a shit pundit or anything like that. But he said a couple of interesting things here. He mentioned something about how there were club rivalries, and in a separate documentary, right enough, around about the 2005, that the miracle in Istanbul thing from when Liverpool won the Champions League that year, coming from 3-0 down against AC Milan. Jamie Carragher does talk about club rivalries in that because they were talking about like beforehand all the build up, like in that summer Euro 2000, the summer of Euro 2004. That's when Benitez came in. That's interesting. You've got two separate people essentially backing all that up with that here, which is interesting. And you've got as well like there was a few interesting things. Of course, you've got the late Sven Goran Eriksson was the manager here. He came in early 2000s. Can't mind if it was 2000, 2001 thereabouts, but obviously it was in the build up to the 2002 World Cup and everything like that. That qualification for that. Of course, they mention it in here about how the people first ever non-Englishman to manage England, and they absolutely smashed Germany. And there was a lot of talk about, well, this is ridiculous, blah blah blah. And then they go and smash Germany 5-1 in Germany, and it's kind of like during the qualification, and it's kind of like, yeah, all right, yeah, we'll change the tune then. So you even had that. I may have vaguely mind that the song is what the people were. I think this was a separate documentary. They must show this, and we'll talk about that later. But so they had some song came out for the 2002 World Cup going about this Sven Goran Eriksson. He's a lovely geezer, but he comes from Sweden. That's another doc. Well, I'll touch on that. Kind of jumping about the place a bit here. So, you know, you've got that right. So the whole pinnacle of the 2006 was then was of this supposed golden generation. And you got Steve McLaren's one of the guests on here as well, one of the talking heads on here. And yeah, and he was the one to succeed Sven after the 2006 World Cup and well, the whole Wally with the Brawley thing. We all seen what happened there. But yeah, I honestly, I've said this. I just think that golden generation was massively fucking overrated. I think they were nowhere near as good as they thought they were. and they're nowhere near as good as the media thought they were. And people talk about the English media now. Trust me, it's nowhere near as bad as it was 20 years ago. They were ramming everything in your fucking face constantly. You had people on like GMTV or whatever it was called at the time. I remember it was like Fiona Phillips, who never speaks about football. She was like, "Yeah, come on, England, England, yes, England's going to do it." And you're just like, shut up. You know, these people did not know what they were talking about. Uh, so there were, and you had people like John Watson was an insufferable commentator. You talk about the 1966 thing, he never shut up about it. Now, granted, there's a lot of Scottish people that never shut up at 1966 too, as well. Granted, I've just brought it up, but you know, I'm doing it for purpose, you know. And funny enough, I've seen a thing. It was a YouTube clip with Talk Sport with Jason Cundy and Jamie O'Hara, and a Scotland fan comes in saying, and he mentions 1966 before any of the English people did. So, you know, we make of that what you will. But yeah, you know, at this point in time, I remember because the media was so insufferable, I just didn't really like the players and everything like that. There's something about them, like Beckham's so unlikable. Seriously. I've been getting some of the McDonald's World Cup meals, and thankfully I've not got a Beckham cup with that. Like, got a couple of Thierry Henry ones. I'm cool with that. You know, a Ronaldinho one, cool with that. But Beckham, it's something about him. I've never liked him. I've never liked him, and it's yeah. So you know, but they were talking about how they were hyping up England and everything like that. First group game against was it Paraguay? Speaking of Paraguay, Jesus, talking about unlikable the way they went about things last night. Anyway, thankfully they're out. But you know, they scraped to a 1-0. They scored in the first few minutes, and then they scraped to a 1-0 win. You sort of think, oh, they're going to hump them and all that. And even like some of the guessing, like, oh yeah, we're going to batter them now when she scored in the first few minutes, and it's just like that just shows the arrogance there. Just like, no, you scraped a 1-0 win. Absolutely struggled the second game against Trinidad and Tobago. Ended up beating them 2-0 eventually. Draw with Sweden, fine, it didn't really matter. I mean, brilliant goal by Joe Cole, by the way. That was an all-timer, that one. But in that game, but it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. That game. I mean, they'd won the group anyway, so whatever. So did they make the draw worse or anything like that? Struggled against Ecuador, right? And this was interesting because they actually could have played Ecuador at some point the way in this tournament, of after the Ecuador beating Germany, but the way things went, they ended up getting Mexico. England got DR Congo and everything like that. But you know, it's interesting. Rio Ferdinand even said, this is a guy who I've ragged on quite recently as well. And he was just like, yeah, sometimes you have to admit that we were shit at times. And he was just something along those lines, he said. I was like, oh, right, okay. But then he mentioned something about how you'd have individual players that they couldn't really play as a team, but an individual player would sometimes pull them around, like a Beckham free kick in this game, which was interesting. And then we come to the Portugal in the quarterfinals. This is something I never even realised. See, in the whole 3 tournaments that Sven was England manager, every single time he was put in the quarterfinal by a team managed by Big Phil Scolari. Like 2002, Brazil in the World Cup, 2004, Rio 2004, and of course 2006 World Cup. So that's unbelievable. Apparently, I vaguely remember this. They did mention this in the documentary that at some point they were actually trying to get Phil Scolari in as his replacement, kind of doing it on the fly and things. So eventually go to Chelsea a few years later, and that one didn't really work out, but whatever. But it's something that kind of just I never even realised every time it was him that put him out in a quarterfinal. So see what I mean? Quarterfinal generation. But you know, of course, you've got that game. Rooney like basically stands on a Portugal player's nuts, basically, and he gets sent off. And you've got but it's all the Portugal players are remonstrating with the referee, and then after he gets sent off, Ronaldo turns around and just winks. And I've had the famous wink. I remember the press and all that. Instead of calling him a winker, essentially wanker slang. But you know, it's funny though, because what I've got to say, I've never been a big Wayne Rooney fan. I think he's massively overrated. I always think he was kind of a flat track bully. You know, if you look at most, he would score in the odd big game, but he was a flat track bully who would mostly score against shite teams for the most part, but go missing in big games. And the way he would act and everything like that. See, after he got sent off, I've got to respect him here when he was put in the interview and he was just said, yeah, would I do the same thing in the same situation? He was just like, yeah, I would. Yeah, and I've got to say, respect. He didn't sit there playing the victim as like saying, I wouldn't have done that, blah, 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 terrible in the Portuguese. He was just like, no, I would have done it. And we're like, you know what? Fair play, mate. Fair play for that. And insult to injury, Portugal scores the winning penalty from Portugal is from Ronaldo. So, of course, Ronaldo would then go on. That's when his peak really started after that in 2006 for Man United. People were, I remember as well at the time, people were saying, oh, him and Rooney can't play together. But to be fair, because they're both at Man United at the time, but the professionalness of that was Ronaldo just, they did work, they worked incredibly well together for a few years again. And Ronaldo just went on to another level after that. He really kicked on. That's where his peak was kicking in. And look, he's still there. I mean, he's an annoying, horrible little shite bag, but you can't deny his quality. I mean, this is another thing. Around about that time, the English media, even a couple of years later, were saying things like, when Ronaldo eventually left Man United for Real Madrid, they were like, doesn't really matter. Rooney's better anyway. It's like, that was stupid at that time. And well, hindsight's a wonderful thing, eh? When you look at the career Ronaldo still had, and look at the career Rooney had. Rooney still had a really good career and everything like that, but he just really fell away quite a bit. And then people were comparing Rooney to Ronaldo and Messi at that point. I'm just like, again, look at Messi, what he's doing. It's like, that's when the English media was at its absolute fucking worst at that point when it comes to overrating people. And time has proven it correct that they were overrating this lot. But, you know, we move on. So, yeah, some really interesting. Talk about Sven scandals, and apparently in the build up, there was like a fake shake or something like that. I vaguely remember hearing about that. A few years earlier as well. This is an interesting thing because I actually, after the France Paraguay game last night, I was flicking about and I went on to Channel 5 and it talked about the time he had the affair with Erika Johnson going into the 2002 World Cup. That's where the little Sven Eriksson song came from as well. And he had all the women surrounding him. And I remember he had that Nancy Diallo was his girlfriend. Everything like that. I mean, Sven, he's like the Swedish James Bond or something like that. And the amount of shagging he's doing. Like, for me, was like, fair play to him. Like, fair play to him. Yeah, God rest his soul and all that. But after that, he lived a good life. You can't blame him. So he had a bit like an affair with his secretary and things like that. So good luck to him. Anyway, but overall, yeah, this was a really interesting documentary. I really enjoyed watching it. And just give my thoughts before tonight's game or early hours of the morning game, England Mexico. The whole thing about the whole altitude and everything like that, it's kind of a leveler. It's true to say, like, England have much better individual players going into this, but home advantage, the crowd, the altitude, it makes a fascinating game. Right, this prediction's like just before 9 p.m. on Sunday, so hours before the game. England will play shit and win 1-0. That's just my feeling. I think that might happen. So, anyway, I'll say, oh, yeah, Scottish people. Look, let's be honest. A week ago, I was talking about how Scottish people were greeting for, they thought Ange Postecoglou was going to get the job. And I was thinking about, well, would he really take the pay cut and all that? But a lot of the Scottish fans were deluded, saying, yeah, he'll come and get it. He, even after being in the Premier, he'll take it. He'll go to Scotland. He'll be the Scotland manager. And yes, speaking of wages and speaking of Ronaldo's club at the moment, El Nazar, I've came in, offered him a load of money, and he's went there. And you can't really fucking blame him. I mean, it's been pissing it down this weekend in Scotland. So, weather's obviously a lot better. Money is way better. And, he either gets to manage Ronaldo or manage like Grant Hanley and Shea Adams and Lyndon Dykes and all that other pish that's in the Scotland team. So can't really fucking blame him. It was an easy decision, mate. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on the documentary. Thanks for taking the time to listen, and goodbye.